Crisis Today with your host, Judge Laura Blackburne.
Oh, and thank you so much for joining us once again for the Crisis Today. I just realized I've been doing this program and trying to bring some really significant guests for almost 5 years. And I don't do it by myself. I simply do what our two producers do, and that's Ms. India Artis and Mr. Reggie. Reggie, I blew your last name. You're going to get very mad at me for some reason. I don't know why. I guess I rushed too much to get here today. But it is an experience that I've enjoyed, and I've enjoyed meeting all of these fantastic guests that you bring in each week. Thank you, Reggie and India. You deserve big applause. We're going to be talking in a few minutes with our resident legal historian and sage, Mr. Jimmy Myerson. Jimmy, what do you have for us today?
Well, I just want to, it's Reggie Thomas.
Thomas,
Judge.
Thank you. I don't know why I locked on his name like that. Thank you.
I have senior moments. You're much younger than me, and I have senior moments all of the time.
Don't let appearances fool you, because that was clearly a senior moment, and he's going to be very upset.
I'm good. They're both great, Reggie and India. So I'm going to speak to you today about now deceased young man, Kalief Browder. And the reason I'm going to speak about him is I think you're going to have on later Robin Miller, the prison activist and former correctional officer at Rikers Island,
yes.
Who wrote a memoir entitled Inside the Dark Underbelly of Rikers Island, and she's a real superstar prison activist. And the reason I'm going to talk about Kalief Browder is to give some context, I'm sure, to what she's going to talk about. Kalief Browder was a 16-year-old African-American youth. 16-year-olds are youths. Young adults who was arrested on May 15th, 2010, and charged with second-degree robbery. He was unable to make the $3,000 bail. He maintained his innocence, and he refused to take a plea bargain that would have released him. He was held in pre-trial detention at Rikers Island for 3 years,
Whoa.
2 of which, almost 800 days, he spent in solitary confinement.
What?
During his time at Rikers, he claimed that he was beaten and abused by prison guards. His story was covered in some degree by local press after his release. In June 2015, he was released in June 2013 after 3 years. He went to a Bronx community college for a period, but he had a hard time adjusting after this experience at Rikers. And in June 2015, young Mr. Browder committed suicide by hanging himself.
Oh, boy.
The conditions of his detentions were widely seen as having caused his mental condition and the 5 or 6 prior attempts at suicide while he was incarcerated. Not insignificantly, the United States Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy invoked Browder's experience in an opinion that Kennedy wrote in an unrelated case. And most significantly, on January 25th, 2016, President Barack Obama signed an executive order to ban solitary confinement for juveniles in federal prisons, among other prison reforms that he announced. And he wrote in an op-ed piece in the Washington Post about the Browder case. He is quoted as saying and writing, this is the former president of the United States, in 2013, Kalief was released having never stood trial. They released him after 3 years. He completed a successful semester at Bronx Community College, but life was a constant struggle to recover from the trauma of being locked up alone for 23 hours a day. One Saturday, he committed suicide at his home. He was just 22 years old. That is referenced by former President Obama in an op-ed in the Washington Post that he wrote in connection with the prison reforms that President Obama, pushed through. So I thought I'd give you that sense of the dark underside, not simply of Rikers Island, but of the criminal justice system in which young African American and older African American, but particularly young African Americans, are being shuttled, and on which we had hoped we could move forward and press for reform. It's going to be a greater struggle now with
the present
now
administration,
existent president of the United States.
And also
office.
the balance has shifted in Congress to a great extent.
Well, that's true, and the Attorney General, Sessions, is very, very, very much a law and order, lock 'em up, who cares?
Well,
kind of a fella.
I'm looking forward to some ray of hope. I think that we can't give up hope. Who was it that said it? Keep hope alive.
Yeah, it was Jesse Jackson.
We
think
know that was Jesse.
Yeah.
And more than ever, we must keep hope alive. Jimmy, thank you so much for your constant and insightful discussions with us on the crisis today.
I look forward to speaking with you again. Thanks, Judge.
All righty.
Uh-huh.
We have with us a woman who has a great story to tell of her experience as a correction officer at Rikers Island for 20 years. Let's welcome Ms. Robin Miller. Thank you so much, Ms. Miller, for joining us today.
And thank you for having me.
Tell us, first of all, how did you decide to become a correction officer when you did?
Well, I graduated high school. I wanted to go to college to be a lawyer, but couldn't afford it. So I worked temp jobs, and then someone gave me an application to be a correction officer, and it was primarily the salary that attracted me. I had no idea what a correction officer was. All I knew is I was working in a bank in Lockbox in Wall Street and was making $11,000 a year.
Wow.
And the correction officer job said $21,000 to start. So I was out.
Yeah, that can be a compelling difference. But what have you to tell us now about your experiences at Rikers? I must tell you that as a judge before I retired, I sat in criminal court for almost all of my career, from criminal court to the Supreme Court Criminal Division, and we were required to visit a correctional institute once a year so that we would know where we were sentencing people to if we were going to sentence someone to a prison term. And the two correctional places that I remember vividly visiting, the first was a state facility, the women's division. And in that division, they had women who had been incarcerated pregnant, had their babies in prison. And to me, that was somehow just a chilling thing. But it had a different bend at Rikers when I had one year visited Rikers. And Rikers was just like the noise. I couldn't get over the noise. And to experience that either as a correction officer or as an inmate could drive you mad. Those are the two things that I have most vivid memories of it. But you have a lot of stories to tell. How long did you serve in Rikers?
Well, I retired 20 years. I did the full 20 years. That's all you required to do to receive your pension and benefits. I only lasted a year and a half on Rikers, which I worked with the men at New York City Correctional Institution for Men. It was called C-76 back then. Now it's the Eric M. Taylor Center. Reason being, it wasn't because of the inmates. I didn't have a problem with the inmates because I grew up in Brownsville and Brooklyn in the projects.
So you understood. You understood.
So I understood the language.
Yes, yes.
And a lot of guys that were in prison were people that I grew up with, or just people who were from Brooklyn. So they kind of now, looking back now, after I've been retired since 2005 and started writing the book, I started reflecting on my entire career. Because, just thinking about it now, I don't even know how I even went into become a correction officer, because it's a dangerous job, and especially working with the men. But the problems that I had coming on the job was not the prisoners. I felt more comfortable because that's what I was hired to do, care, custody, and control of inmates. Comfortable being with them versus my colleagues and supervisors is what gave me the most problems.
Wow.
And made my life a living hell while I was on Rikers Island. And the reason I left is because the warden was after me. Like, he was a womanizer.
Oh, and you wouldn't cooperate.
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, I laughed at him.
Oh.
And I think that, and I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to be disrespectful.
In your heart of hearts, you did.
No, but I laughed because I remember they used to put me on all the worst undesirable posts that a correction officer could probably, want to be in. One of them was the gates, the annex lower gate. And I heard so much about this warden. He was like known throughout. And he was walking with two other superior officers. He was in civilian clothing. I didn't know who he was. I'd never seen him. But he gets to the gate and snaps his finger and points. And all I could think about was the movie I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. And I just started laughing, and I'm trying to control myself. And I couldn't help it. You know how you laugh and you want to stop and
keep spurting out.
Like a person coming in your courtroom and laughing at you. You can get her out of here. So basically that was the effect. But after that, I was assaulted by a male officer. And at the end of the day, it was probably because I wouldn't sleep with him.
Oh.
That's probably what was the bottom line. So my problems weren't with the prisoners. And mind you, I left there. I went to the courts. I went to the Manhattan House, the Old Tombs. Like, everywhere I've worked with prisoners, in the gut of the prisoners. When they would come to your courtrooms, after they leave your courtrooms and come to me, I have to deal with them being railroaded probably in the courtroom to go back to Rikers Island when they really want to go home.
Of course.
So it was, and a lot of times I was left alone. And you remember busloads of prisoners coming, they had to be there 9 o'clock.
Right.
They agitated. It's hot, it's funky, it's loud. I'm in the midst of that, and then I'm opening gates when the court officers come to bring them to the courtroom, and I'll turn around. Where's my backup? The guy just came back. He was just blue trial. Where's my backup? He ready to pop somebody up. But I had to use my communication skills.
And they work.
And that's what saved me. That's what. But mind you, being on Rikers for the year and a half, almost 2 years, I was traumatized because of the beatings that I seen just with the inmates. They was beating. It's like you can't say anything wrong. Like if they say, "Oh, shut up," and the inmates say, "You shut up," that's an automatic beat down, and that's not how it's supposed to go. We're supposed to pull our pen out, and we're supposed to write them up.
But they'd rather beat them up.
Problems with the prisoners, because I had problems, little minor problems, I would write them up. And then I remember being called in the office by the captain telling me I write too many infractions, but that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm a female working in the men's jail. I can't fight them.
And
I don't
need
want to fight them.
That's not your job.
Yes. But that's what the problem is. And I watched, I've been watching throughout the years, their solution to controlling the inmates, supposedly to keep the violence down, is by brutally beating them.
And violence breeds violence.
Yes, and it's a negative environment to start out with because once you take a person's freedom, you done demolish them. Once you take their freedom, what else do they have to lose? What, their life? So if you're going to treat them and punish them on top of that, and mind you, right, because Ireland is primarily detainees. They've only been accused. They haven't been convicted.
And they're mad because if they were wrongly convicted or even being held before they go to trial, that is a stressful situation. I can only imagine if you had to do that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's got to put some stress on you being in that environment.
Well, for me, it felt like they were grown men, these grown men, because that's what I worked with primarily, was like a bunch of babies. I became mommy at some point, mommy, auntie, because I did my job and they looked to me, because you got to provide them for the tissue and the phone calls and the this and the that. And the fact that they seen that I cared about my job and I cared about people, it was about respect. It's Miss Miller, Miss Miller, Miss Miller, Miss Miller, Miss Miller all day. I used to tell them I'm changing my name. Miss Miller, Miss Miller, Miss Miller, Miss Miller. It's like, it's like when I left work, I didn't even want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to hear anything. It's like the noise. And it still affects me because I talk loud. See, people don't understand when you're a correction officer, and especially a female working in a men's jail, you don't speak soft and pink and dainty. You're dealing with brutal men.
And you got to measure up.
And it's a lot. No, but it's a lot. You're dealing with a lot of people at one time every day. You calling out names. You're on the child, on the this. You speaking over hundreds. I used to be, and mind you, when I came on in 1983, they decided to change it where females go on the B post, which is in the back, in the housing areas, locked behind the gate with these male prisoners. And that once was I scared. That's what scares me now, thinking about me back then in my 20s.
Well, you probably wore your uniform and carried yourself in such a way that said, I'm in charge. And they knew you were in charge. And you didn't back away. And I can't imagine, just hearing your voice, I can't imagine you being, a little bitty lady, that talk like that in a place like that, because that's not how you have to hold yourself. And if you, I don't know what your physique is, you're tall, short, medium, but your voice registers authority, and that I'm sure carried a lot of weight in that position.
Well, I'll tell you like this. Prior to coming to the job, I wanted to be a model as well.
So that means you're tall.
So I came in with the look, the model look. When I was quiet, a lot of times it's going into certain situations. Even now, I'm quiet. I want to assess where I'm at. Because I know once I speak, then people are not going to reveal who they are. So I came on the job, not letting them really know, especially my colleagues. Basically playing dumb. I can do that very well.
Yeah, we learned that at some stage. I think that's built into us. We know when and how.
Then when it's time to speak,
you know how to do that too.
Yeah, don't play with me. My mission now is, because I have a nephew now that's incarcerated upstate. After writing my book was therapeutic for me because it opened up a whole lot of things that I suppressed. I had no idea, because I've always had to put up this strong exterior, like, I can handle everything, like I'm Superwoman, and I'm not. And when I retired, I basically broke down after a certain point without even realizing that. And I realized I was abused. I got my sister the job. She got approached by a crack dealing correction officer. So her career was over because she became a crackhead.
Oh, no.
When I retired, July 1st, 2005, first of all, when I retired, my nephew got locked up for something he didn't do. Now he's doing 25 to life twice upstate.
Oh, boy.
I'm fighting that to get his conviction overturned. My sister came to my house July 1st, 2005, and told me don't leave her son. This is before he even went to trial. She died July 2nd, 2005. So 2005 just shut me down. Years later, I decided to write the book. And initially, I was angry. It was an angry, as they call it, the Angry Black Woman book.
What's the name of the book so our listeners can look it up and buy it?
It's Inside the Dark Underbelly of Rikers Island. A retired female correction officer speaks out.
And that name again is Ms. Robin Miller.
By Robin K. Miller, yes. Inside the Dark Underbelly of Rikers Island, a retired female correction officer speaks out. I have my book. You can buy it on Amazon, and I have my book signing coming up next month. Finally, April 6th at Judson Memorial Church. That's in Manhattan, right next to NYU. It's 239 Thompson Street from 6 to 9. It's on a Thursday, so the people can come after work. It's my launch party, and I have civil rights attorney Norman Siegel.
Oh, I know him, yeah.
He's one of my guest speakers. And I have activist Regina Smith. She's going to be speaking. She was just in the New York Daily News. She was incarcerated in Bedford Hills, and she has a story to tell. I'm trying to get her now to write her book about what she's seen on the side as far as what the correction officers are doing. My goal right now and my mission is to fix the prison conditions because upstate prisons are worse than Rikers Island, and it's almost like a Guantanamo Bay setting. They're starving them, they're torturing them, they're abusing them unnecessarily, and nobody is paying attention.
They don't have an advocate.
Yeah, but it doesn't stop with me with the book. I already wrote the screenplay, and I have the TV series. I'm going to keep it going. I'm going to put it in their faces. This is not about a book and just trying to make money. No, this is about a movement and trying to stop what's going on behind the prison walls. Because you're locked up, whether you're guilty or innocent, does not have a right, a person to give them the right to treat you, with disrespect and treat you like a slave, because that's basically what's going on upstate. And I learned that from my nephew being incarcerated.
When you say treat you like a slave,
upstate, they didn't know I had a book coming out, and that's when I got to see what was going on up there, and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, where I been? Like, where's the people? Why nobody speaking about this?
Well, what do you mean when you say they're treated like slaves? I wanted to follow up on that a little bit.
They're feeding them portions of a 5-year-old. That's
What?
for starters.
You mean
They're putting them
a meal for a grown man?
The meal. Breakfast comes in. Picture one of them little TV dinner trays. That's the size they feed them. First of all, before that, they took meat off the menu.
What?
They feeding them soy now. Everything comes in bags.
Oh, God.
I overheard one of the correctional officers saying the rats don't even want to eat it. So if they don't have family members out in the world that's sending them packages to eat food from out here, they're basically starving. They're starving them in jail. And then they made it so that you can only get one package a month, but you can't have a TV. So you can either eat or watch TV. That was for starters. Number two, they're beating them brutally, and I've witnessed that, not visually, but from what happened to my nephew. They're beating them, they're covering it up, and then they're throwing them in solitary confinement. They're making them refuse medical attention, so it's not documented. That's how Norman Siegel, that's how I got involved with Norman Siegel, because he went up there with me. And so he knows firsthand. That's like my strongest ally right now. That's my friend.
Well,
he's like really has my back.
I worked with Norman years ago, and he is a genuine, sincere activist and wants to right all the wrongs in the world. I remember him very well.
Yeah,
and
he
so
remembers you too.
friend.
He spoke very highly of you.
Yeah.
Very highly, yes. And that's why I gravitated towards him, and I drove him up there. So if he makes a promise to you, he follows through. I picked him up and drove him up there. Now, you see how I'm talking. I was just... and he's calm and laid back and mild. And I was... But He loves me, so I'm cool.
Yes, that's Norman.
But yes, they're torturing. I'm gonna give you another example. If they're walking in the hallways, they'll tell them to put their hands on the wall. They just pull them off the line. Put your hands on the wall. Spread your legs. Face the wall. They take their hand and slide it up the crack of their butt.
Oh my
And then
goodness.
if the inmate turns around because they've been violated, they smash their face in the wall,
Ugh.
beat them down, put them in solitary confinement. Nobody's going to know because who can they call? And then they stop their visit, so they can't even get a visit. So they cover it. It's a lot going on upstate that nobody's covering. The only ones that's covering it is the New York Times, and that's Mr. Michael Schwartz and Mr. Michael Weinrib. They're covering it. The murders and everything, the things, the assaults, the beatings. It's a lot. It's torture. Calling them out of their name, all the racial names you can possibly think of. They're calling them. They can't say nothing. The prisoners up there are scared.
Of course.
Because they know they don't have any backup. They're planting weapons, give them a new charge. I've seen that on Rikers. Because they always, and this is what we were taught, the inmate has no wins. As a matter of fact, coming on the job in the academy, I thought we was going to war. It's like, I'm coming on the job, I don't know what a correction officer is. I've never really been in no prison. And we was doing karate classes and Ki and Ki and all of this, and I'm like, but these people haven't even been convicted. Like, when I got in there, it's like, why are they training us to go to war?
Because these
So
could
you
be
go in
innocent
automatically
people.
thinking that these prisoners are the enemy.
And that they're
not right.
guilty of whatever they're being charged with, even though they've never been before a court to have it adjudicated. And that's
Yes.
sad that a waiting trial is treated as if he's already been convicted.
Yes.
What about the women in prison? Have you had any opportunity to observe or interact with women who are inmates?
The only interaction I've had with the women was like when I worked in Manhattan courts when they first got arrested. And they was in the bullpens. I'm sitting in there with them all day. Women is just women, catty and just, they're treated differently in at least in the courts and on Rikers Island. But the stories that I've been hearing, I worked in a women's house for 1 week on the job training, OJT. From what I'm hearing, especially from Regina Smith, it was a lot going on, from rapes to assaults to, it's just, the main thing I've been hearing is the rapes.
Yes.
And then one of the things I remember hearing when I was a rookie was it was alleged that one of our deputy wardens used to take one of the inmates out of the cell at night, take her in the closet, the office or whatever, and she was pregnant.
Oh, my goodness.
And they covered it up. And they paid her off and they got her out of jail. That was one of the things that I remember. But I never really worked with the women, and I probably would have quit had I worked with the women because I didn't want to work with a bunch of women because it's too much challenging going on. I preferred to work with the guys because I knew that they would listen to me. Women would probably challenge me, and I didn't have time for that. I don't like a lot of drama. So I was comfortable, because it felt like being on the Avenue, Stone Avenue. That's what I called it. In Brooklyn when I worked on Rikers Island. I probably would not have left had it not been for that warden.
Oh, yeah.
And then had it not been for that officer beating me. He left me with a fractured finger and a bloody face, and they covered that up too.
Has there been any, what could we call it, investigation of what happens in prisons that you're aware of? Any kind of committee that has some oversight responsibility?
Well, Inspector General. But the Inspector General that I remember was filled with officers. I wrote about that in my book as well. Why would you put correction officers in positions of Inspector General? Because that's a conflict of interest right there.
Oh, okay.
And what they would do is, if you was it depends on what the situation was. If you was part of the clique and you beat an inmate down to, it was almost basically attempted murder, they would cover it up. If you was part of the people, the only thing that they couldn't get, they would not touch was dirty urine. If you came in with dirty urine. But if you got arrested, and look, I remember when I came on the job, this warden allegedly got caught with cocaine in his car, kilos of cocaine in his car.
What?
Yeah, and it got thrown out.
So he skated on that.
Inspector General, to me, I don't know how it is today, but my opinion from when I worked for those 20 years, they was on the take. It was about who you know. And that's why when they beat my nephew up and I called Inspector General out of courtesy, as I was writing my reports, all my reports is in the book. The first thing out his mouth is, he beat the officer up. I'm telling you, they covering it up and all that. I said, you know what, don't worry about it. I had to go to the FBI. It got that far. Nobody would do anything. I had to take it all the way to the FBI. They pulled out the correction officer playbook. And I know the playbook. That was the whole thing. I knew exactly what they were going to do. So no, the inspector, we need a watchdog. We need someone from a separate organization to install hidden cameras and plants to go inside. And that's the only way, that's one of the ways that you can start working on fixing this problem.
In your experience, I don't know if you ever had an opportunity to visit or learn about prison systems in other countries that might be a model, if I could use that word, for, people who commit crimes and are found guilty and need to pay a price for their crime. What kind of facility ought they be in for them to benefit in terms of improving themselves so that when they have served their time, they can return to society with a different attitude about how to conduct themselves? To your knowledge, is there such a prison system anywhere in the world?
Well, someone sent me a link to my Facebook page last year. I think it was last year. Yeah, about last year. I think it was a prison in Norway. How they treat their prisoners while they're incarcerated. They had computers. They had it looked like a dorm room, like a college room. But the thing that I would say, as far as fixing the prison system here in the States, is that this is one of the, because I used to talk a lot to the inmates. That's how I found out things. The problem was they couldn't get a job. They wanted to work. They didn't want to sell drugs. They didn't want to do burglaries, robberies. They didn't want to commit crimes, the ones that did commit crimes, because they used to admit it to me. But when then you have to also break down, there's other things in the prison system, which is mental health. Some of these guys are not well mentally.
I've heard that, yes.
So, and then if you go in there and you torture them, you're making them worse.
Of course.
And then some of them come in there and they're okay mentally, but by the time they finish with them in there, they're worse. And then you have the drug abusers. You get more drugs in jail than you get on the street.
Oh my goodness!
So how they come? They can't get off drugs. They need to have programs for them, strict programs for the. I know they had TAP, they had decap and all of that when I was working. To go to the drug, let them go to the drug programs. The mental health, let them be treated in a mental health facility. They need to bring back a lot of programs back to the jails. They took everything out. They have nothing.
Yes, I've heard that.
A lot of times these guys are sitting in the cell all day or sitting in the dorm all day doing absolutely nothing.
Robin, I'm going to have to bring our conversation either to a close or if you can stay on, I have my next guest waiting, and it may be an opportunity, if you have the time, to interact during the course of his time. My longtime friend, Michael Eric Dyson.
Oh, I love him. I'll stay on. I was a fan of him.
Go and break it down.
Michael!
And you better watch out, Michael. She's been trained as a warden in a prison. So,
I'm hearing her. I'm hearing her.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the Crisis Today. And you have just been incredible in terms of books. She's on her first book. Now, you are 18 books into the library. And just saying your name is something that people immediately have snapped to. What are you up to today?
Well, thank you so very much. I've written my 19th book, which is Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America.
Ooh, I like the title.
So, yes, ma'am. I'm going around the country talking about the need for white brothers and sisters to engage in a serious conversation about race and to take seriously their own racial privilege and the kind of, serious engagement with race that needs to occur. Because usually when we think about race, we think about red, black, brown, yellow. We don't think about white folk. And so we're inviting white people to engage in a serious conversation because, look, their failure to deal with racism and race and privilege results in sometimes black death and brown death and the horrible consequences to our nation. And we're seeing now the literal face of white privilege and white power in Donald Trump. So it's a lot of stuff that's going on that I'm talking about in that book today.
Well, you've been on the book trail. If you said this is your 19th book, and I know you've had the NAACP Image Awards for your work. What drives you? What is it that keeps that creative blood flowing in your veins?
Well, I want to bear witness to the truth. I'm an ordained Baptist minister. So as the old preacher said, I had my burning before I had my learning.
Amen to that. I heard of that.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm motivated by trying to bear witness to the truth, to shout out as much truth as I can, to reach as many people as I can, to articulate visions and values and virtues that are important, not only to our people, but to the transformation of this culture. And when I see the suffering that we're enduring and the hardship that we've, suffered over the years, I'm willing and able and desirous of stepping out there to bear witness to what has gotten us over all these years and to also speak out against the multiple forms of injustice that I see going on in this country today.
What's the name again of your most current book?
The most current book is called Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America.
So in that book, you're telling white America why we have our tears and what their responsibility is for these tears. Is that a fair estimate? I haven't read it yet. I'm going to.
Yes, ma'am. No, that's a fair way of talking about it.
So,
that, we're suffering this. We're suffering this. You're unconscious of it often. You deny it. You have your own tears. You're very fragile and vulnerable. When we tell you the truth, you can't hear it. You say, oh, my God, it's too difficult for me to hear. Why do you make me feel bad or guilty and so on? So my point is, let me reach out to white brothers and sisters through a sermon. Let me preach to you. Let me bear witness to the gospel of race and black identity and grappling with white privilege and what that means and deconstructing it and helping you understand. And then offering ways of you making amends and repair for the damage and trauma that have been endured.
One of the things that I'm glad, Robin, you can stay on a minute here with us, is Robin Miller is a recent author, and she's served her time as a correction officer in the state of New York for over 20 years. And her view, if you will, of the result of what our young black men in particular pay the price for all of the bad things that go on around young black men particularly, but the age is going up for black men who are suffering the racism that you're talking about. What's the answer to some of this? I like to deal with answers, however far-fetched you may think they are. What are the answers to particularly the targeting of our black men?
Well, first of all, we got to acknowledge it. You can't address it if you don't acknowledge that it's real. And a lot of people are in denial, pretending it's not real. Oh no, this is the consequence of class more than race. This is geography more than that. Well, look, race makes class hurt more, and geography is made even more vulnerable because of being black or brown. For instance, in Hurricane Katrina, they said, well, the storm was indifferent to race, but where people lived was racially determined. And if you lived higher, you were better off, and if you lived lower, you were worse off. And guess what? Most of the people who were worse off were African American or Latino or even Vietnamese. So the point is that we've got to acknowledge it to begin with, do an analysis based upon that acknowledgement, why we're being targeted, how we're being targeted, whether we're victims of what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, of the disproportionate concentration of black people and brown people in prison and in jails, and how our kids are being targeted by zip code and how they're being expelled earlier from schools. When you put all this stuff together in aggregate, the data, it suggests we have to have a political approach. We have to have an educational approach. How do we keep our kids from being expelled earlier and earlier in school, which becomes a feeder system to detention, which becomes a warehouse for jail, which then fuels them into prison. So my point is, there are things that white brothers and sisters can do and that we all can do. First of all, voting is critical, very important.
Oh, yes.
And not just at the top of the ticket, not just for the presidency. Down ballot voting is quite important. Local voting is quite important. Who are the prosecutors who will either charge the police with doing some of the things that they do to black and brown people that are wrong, or let them off? Local prosecutors. And if you are voting at the local level, you are having a tremendous impact on your own economic, but especially your political future and that of your children. Raise our awareness about social activism. The Black Lives Matter movement is extremely important in linking police brutality and trauma with the healthiness of black people and the need for a certain kind of mental health approach. That's extremely important. Figuring out how to forge connections and links between our churches and these broader communities. Because if the church has all that money and time and resource, it has to be used for the benefit and advantage of the larger black community. And then we've got to demand that white brothers and sisters own up to their own responsibility.
Well, so that seems to be...
In my book, I talk about individual reparations accounts.
Well, before you go hold it just 1 second. We have found ourselves, the result of your voting discussion, we earned Trump by sitting on our you-know-what instead of going to the polls. We went to the polls like they were handing out $100 bills to vote for President Obama. But we sat on our you-know-whats and sat it out. And now we're reaping the failure of our need to sow the vote. We didn't vote.
Yeah, I think that, look, black women tried to save the day by themselves.
Well,
in the high 90s.
Tell us something we don't already know. We've been
black women done saved everybody, themselves, ourselves, the nation. Tried to save it this time. White women who voted 54% for Donald Trump. Black men voted 13% for Donald Trump. What in the world were you thinking?
God knows.
Patriarchy has its consequences, and the inability to see women as leaders harmed us as well. So it's not so much that black people didn't vote. It's what happened with the apportionment of that vote. And let's be real. Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes.
Yes, that's...
So Donald Trump did not win the election based upon a popular vote. He won it because he was lucky enough in the lottery, so to speak, of the Electoral College to sweep those states. So let's not overinterpret what we did or exaggerate the consequence of what we did, even though we know voting is critical. It's a central word and the key word in the vocabulary of democracy and justice for us. But we got to also admit what happened and the revenge of the so-called white working class, where the white working class basically voted against its interests, because Donald Trump is not a blue-collar billionaire. He's not going to have the backs of most people. We see now the Republicans trying to reveal and unveil their, replacement for Obamacare, And a lot of people who voted for Trump are going to be hurt and harmed as a result of the political choices that they made. So this thing is a lot more complicated and sophisticated, and we gotta have that kind of and sophisticated analysis.
Well, I think we are. That's one of the things that I try to do with this 1 hour a week that I have given to talking with people who have some interest as well as some ideas as to where we ought to be going now. Your books are exceedingly interesting in terms of your assessment of where we are and some indication of where we ought to be going. If you could think of 3 things that any person who cares about our freedom and justice for all ought be doing, what would you say those 3 things are? Let's start with you, Robin, just because I know Michael's got a list. Go ahead.
Well, I got to go first. All right, let me see. You said 3 things.
Uh-huh.
Say that again.
3 things that we ought be doing to take back our nation. That make it simple.
Okay. First of all, we need to start forming and sticking with groups and movements. We need to use our pen. We need to start writing. Like when I counsel a lot of people that have family members in prison that are being beaten by these officers, and the first thing they do is pick up the phone. No, you don't. You document everything. So you need to learn how to utilize your writing skills. We need to speak out more and stop being afraid. Like a lot of people are so afraid. They're so scared. They say to me, you're brave. Brave for speaking the truth? Like, that's not brave. That's what you're supposed to do.
Well, Michael, what do you think?
All I want to say is amen to Robin. It's extremely important because, look, it is brave. I don't care if she doesn't recognize it. She's brave because a lot of people know what to do but don't do it. They're supposed to do it and don't act on it. So she's absolutely right. And then, look, if your favorite show go off of TV, you mad. You writing the ABC, NBC, you pissed, you upset. Well, do the same thing as Robin is suggesting for your voting rights or for your rights as a visitation, your loved ones, the abuse they're suffering and enduring in the criminal injustice system. So you gotta, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's just the bottom line. And if you ain't raising your voice,
nobody can hear you.
Ain't nobody raising hell. Ain't nobody trying to hear you. Number one. Number two, organizing is extremely important, and you ain't got to have permission from nobody. You can do it on a local level for your school board to determine how your children are being treated. Local municipalities in terms of the tax base and what they're using that money for. Your local church and the meetings and determining what happens there. So that organizing element is extremely important, number one. And then number two, voting is important on every level. It is the basic fundamental gesture that a citizen can make in a democracy to register his or her viewpoint. But we know that the voting got jacked up this last time. So we have to organize around making sure, not just being worried about Russian hacking of these machines. What about the American, voting ID laws that constrict and prohibit a lot of people who should be able to vote? So in terms of organizing, we got to be aware of our rights and responsibilities and what we can do to fight back against that. That's why Eric Holder was extremely important.
Oh,
the
yes.
Department of Justice was extremely important, but now under Jeff Sessions, we know it's withering.
That's scary.
And then, thirdly, we got to be able to, on the local level, act as parents and as citizens in our churches and institutions of higher education that we participate in, or the local schools that we go to with our children. We have got to find a way to leverage our presence there to mentor our young people. That's something you ain't nobody got to give you permission to mentor young people. And not just kids in your family. I'm talking about people outside your family who are not as privileged as you are.
Well,
we ain't got Robin as an inspiration.
Well,
so figure out a way to mentor young people, teach them the right thing to do, in terms of social behavior, in terms of expressing their dissent, in terms of giving them a sense of why it's important to go to school. Mentoring young people can be a revolutionary gesture and act that everybody has access to.
I think.
But I want to say something real quick.
Go ahead. Don't have to be that
on
quick.
his point of mentoring. I lost my mother at 11 years old, living in the projects in the 60s. Well, in the 70s, she passed away. And it was because of my neighbors, and it was because of all them women in my community is the reason why I didn't go astray. It's Brenda, is Pam, April, is a bunch of them. It's Kim. It's a lot of them older women that I looked up to and that watched over me. Denise Maynard is a lot of them that watched over me and made sure I went to school. They kept an eye on me. So my own conscience, besides what my mother had instilled in me, just them watching them being positive women and being involved with the kids in the community is what helped me get to where I am today. Because I basically grew up, me and my sister, without any parental guidance at all. Once my mother passed away, my father, he just paid the rent, bought food, and just let us do what we wanted to do. So it was the choices that we made, but it was the people around us and the neighbors next door that, it kept me on the straight and narrow.
Michael, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your book, Tears We Will Not Stop.
Cannot stop.
Cannot stop. Tell me just a thumbnail of that, if you will.
Well, the book is set up as a church service. So I have opening prayer. I have the scripture lesson from Martin Luther King Jr. The hymns are from hip-hop culture. Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, KRS-One, NWA. So I constructed that way. Then I get into the sermon itself, three chapters, the sermon to white America, about white innocence, about white privilege, about coming to grips with white responsibility, and then learning about the next three parts of that sermon are directed to white America, but talking about black people. Are we our own worst enemy as black people? And I deal with that issue. People say, well, it's not the police killing you people, it's you killing each other. Well, 94% of black people who are murdered by black people, but 84% of white people who are murdered by white people. So kill where they live. If you want integrated killing, you got to have integrated communities. So my point is to talk about that. Then I have a chapter called Coptopia, Utopia for Police, and how we have to acknowledge what's going on that's been destructive in the community. It's not simply a matter of establishing trust between law enforcement and black communities. You got to stop the predatory behavior. You don't establish a relationship of trust between somebody who's abusing you. You want the abuse to stop. Then you can reestablish trust in the particular relationship that you want to see preserved. So I talk about that. I got a chapter on Donald Trump at the end. And my benediction is the way white brothers and sisters can do what they're supposed to do, individual reparations accounts, educating themselves, learning as much as they can, reading as much as they can, showing up to be great allies to us, and so on and so forth. And then I close out the book with a prayer. That's what it is.
All right.
Well, it's interesting to me, Michael, you have been prolific in your writing and in your speaking, and your message is out there. And Robin, you've taken that first step by exposing the incarceration system. Rikers is a target in your book, but I suspect that Rikers is not the only hellhole of incarceration in this country. And our young people don't think about Rikers until they're on their way there, most of them, unless they have a family member or a neighbor who's, he got locked up. I've heard that a lot. But what's really going on inside that lockup is a hellhole, a horror. And as bad as they thought they were on the street, they ain't seen bad until they get inside that place. And that is what both you and Michael are talking about. We have to begin to stand up ourselves and make some change in our communities, starting with our own families. I bet you if you stopped 10 black people on any street in the United States from Fifth Avenue to No Avenue, they would have a relative incarcerated somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And
Starting with me.
Start with me.
And I raise my hand. I have had relatives incarcerated, and
Yes.
it is almost like unavoidable. So, what do we do in the last minute and a half that we have? How can we wake up our communities to avoid incarceration and learn how to do working together for a common good?
Well, being born white would help.
We got to pray.
White folks are committing just as much crime as anybody else, ain't getting sent to jail.
That's it.
Let's not pretend that it's the bad behavior of black people. Look, I'm not here to justify no good bad behavior by nobody. But I'm telling you, the reason black people are put in jail and brown people are put in jail, but white people are not, they're doing the same crime, they're smoking the same drugs, they're engaging in the same activities. This is what we mean by the prison industrial complex being bloated and swollen by the injustice and the injustice that's being perpetrated against us. So I believe in personal responsibility, and we have to do everything we can to prevent that, mentor each other, love each other, send each other to correct institutions. A lot of these prisons are filled with people with mental health problems and challenges.
Yes.
We don't talk about that, but at the end of the day, being born white would be a hell of a boost because then you wouldn't criminalize us, right? So what happens? White folk do drugs. They get into addiction programs because they're addicted to heroin, and to meth. Black people do drugs, crack. They are criminalized and sent to prison for 20, 25, 30 years. So let's be honest about what we're dealing with and the injustice that we confront.
How about?
Yeah, because you don't have to do anything to go to jail. That's in my book. I wrote that in my book. You don't have to do anything to go to jail. All somebody has to do is make an allegation. Somebody can lie on you. You don't have to do anything.
Look at the
So it's like you can't. It's not. Yeah, being white will be easy, but it's not like a lot of. I would believe that, especially on Rikers and upstate. I believe that 50% of the prisoners that's locked up upstate is innocent.
I
They
wouldn't
just
be
didn't have that
surprised.
money to fight it.
We
That's
have
what I
about
believe,
30.
and that's from being in there as well. I believe that.
We have 30 seconds, Michael. I'll ask you to wrap it up for us.
Well, listen to Robin. That's my wrap up. Get her book. Buy her book. What's the name of your book, Robin?
Inside the Dark Underbelly of Rikers Island, a retired female correctional officer speaks out, and Michael and the judge are going to be at my book signing.
Oh, that would be
On
lovely.
April 6th at Judson Memorial Church. I'm so glad you guys will be there.
Well, I'm going to try my best.
Speaking it, so it is. That's
Thank you, Michael.
If
Eric,
you could attend, I would appreciate if both of y'all could make an appearance,
Where is that?
if you can.
Where is that?
It's April 6th. It's Thursday. It's next month.
what day? Where?
It's at Judson Memorial Church. It's right next to NYU. It's from 6 to 9 at night. It's on a Thursday, 239 Thompson Street.
Michael Eric Dyson, a legend in all of our time, and
Yes.
Robin Miller, a very brave woman to have brought forth this information about incarceration. Thank you both.
Thank you, and thank you so much.
We don't need to escalate.
For more information on how to subscribe to the Crisis Magazine or join the NAACP, visit us at www.thecrisismagazine.com. The opinions expressed in The Crisis Today are those solely of the host and our guests, and not necessarily those of the NAACP, the Crisis Publishing Company, or the Crisis Magazine.